Many people feel as though they know everything there is to know about the origin of Rome. The story of Aeneas's flight and Romulus's fratricide are seemingly etched into the Western mind. However, there is much about Rome that is unknown to even those who have an extensive knowledge of their history. One of the most mysterious aspects of the founding of the Eternal City is the secret name of Rome. The name was considered to be so secretive and so revered that a man was executed for revealing it.
In this video, I will explore the story of that man, the reason the name was to be kept secret, what the primary sources say of the name, and the candidates for the name. It is best to start with the reason for why a city must have a secret name, and then move into the most famous example of it being revealed. According to Roman writers such as Macrobius and Pliny the Elder, there was a practice used on cities called evocatio or invocation. The practice was based on the belief that all cities had a protector deity who would help it in times of war. However, this deity could be persuaded to defect to an attacker if it was promised that the attacker would give the same or better worship to the deity. Roman priests would use formulas to perform the rituals to make an appeal to these deities. Once the rituals were performed, the Roman besiegers felt confident in their ability to take the given city. Macrobius records the words of evocatio used at Carthage. They read as follows: To any god, to any goddess, under whose protection are the people and state of Carthage, and chiefly to thee who art charged with the protection of this city and people, I make prayer and do reverence and ask grace of you all, that ye abandon the people and state of Carthage, forsake their places, temples, shrines, and city, and depart therefrom, and that upon that people and state ye bring fear and terror and oblivion, that once put forth ye come to Rome, to me and to mine, and that our places, temples, shrines, and city may be more acceptable and pleasing to you, and that ye take me and the Roman people and my soldiers under your charge, and that we may know and understand the same. If ye shall so have done, I vow to you temples and solemn games. After this, there were to be made sacrifices and examination of entrails to see if the ritual was performed correctly. This brings up an interesting question. Why did no one attempt to use this tactic on the city of Rome? Surely Pyrrhus or Hannibal or any number of enemies of the city of Rome who were in a position to attempt the siege could have used this tactic to take the city. This is where the concept of the secret name comes in. In many of the documents which touch on the secret name of Rome, it is assumed that the tutelar deity of the city is the same as the name of the city. So this would mean that the reason that Rome had not had evocatio used against it is because Rome was simply a public name, not the true name of the city. This is a name the Romans took great care to keep secret, lest the fate they inflicted on others befall them. However, there was a particular episode where the secret name of Rome was revealed. This leads us into Quintus Valerius Soranus. Who exactly Soranus was prior to his revealing the name is uncertain. According to Pliny, he invented the table of contents and is the author of the book Apoptides. There is a history of identifying him as a friend of Cicero who is mentioned throughout his writings. The Quintus Valerius Soranus of Cicero has a brother named Decimus, had knowledge in both Latin and Greek, and was one of the most cultured of all Roman citizens. There are arguments against the identification of Cicero's friend with the revealer of the secret name of Rome. Valerius was a very common name among the Romans, and the name Soranus simply refers to being from the city of Sora. It is not impossible that Sora produced more than one great scholar of the same name. But I would say that the tradition that says these two men are one and the same is probably correct. As I will explain later, there is a connection between the secret name of Rome and the Greek language, something Cicero's Quintus was skilled in. Varro, in his On the Latin Language, cites a Valerius of Sora multiple times. According to Servius, he was a tribune of the plebs. The most famous event of Soranus' life would of course be his revealing of the secret name of Rome. However, the fate he would meet because of it is not as clear as one would expect. All sources admit he suffered a penalty, but some go into more detail than others. Plutarch's first mention of Soranus' death is rather vague, saying he met an evil end in connection with the superstition around the secret name of Rome. In the life of Pompey, Plutarch recalls the report of Appius, who said that Pompey treated Soranus with unnatural cruelty, asking Quintus questions before having his attendants lead him away and execute him. However, Plutarch is suspicious of Appius' account of Pompey, believing Appius was biased when it came to accounts of Caesar's friends and enemies. Pliny simply mentions that Soranus uttered the secret name, and soon after, suffered the penalty. Gaius Solinus makes similar comments in his Polyhistor, saying that Soranus was executed for profane talk because he revealed the name. Servius has the most dramatic account of Soranus' fortunes. Servius reported that Soranus was crucified for pronouncing the secret name. According to Servius, leading up to the event, Soranus either was taken directly from the Senate and crucified, or fled but was captured by a praetor on behalf of the Senate and then crucified. The latest account of Seranus is from the Byzantine historian John Leitus. He tells a similar story to Pliny. Leitus speaks of a magistrate who pronounced the mystic name of the city openly in an assembly. This magistrate simply was paid a penalty. Leitus' account brings up an important question. How was the name revealed? Given that Seranus was a famous writer whose work is cited by figures such as Varro and Pliny, one would assume it was written. Macrobius even mentions it being written in old books. But by that same token, if it was written down, why do none of the authors who speak at the event pass it down? It could not be that they are too superstitious to utter it, as authors such as Macrobius speculate on what the name actually is. If Seranus is cited by authors such as Pliny, Varro, and St. Augustine, surely one of his most famous actions would have been circulated in written form if it was written down. So while Leitus' account has its issues, as we will see in the next section of the video, he is probably correct when he says Seranus revealed it orally. Another question, which the sources are unclear on, is why the name was revealed. No source actually provides a reason why Seranus might reveal the name. The most likely explanation, as proposed by some historians, is that Seranus, being a Marian, attempted to obstruct Sulla's campaign of 82 BC, although how exactly he thought divulging the name would do that is unclear. Having said all that can be said about the life of Quintus Valerius Seranus, it is time to transition to talking about the sources themselves. The main accounts related to the secret name of Rome from antiquity are Pliny, Silenus, Plutarch, Servius, Varro, St. Augustine, John Leitus, Macrobius, and Ovid. The first source to write about the execution of Seranus is Varro. However, his account only survives in citations by other authors. Of the surviving accounts, Pliny, Servius, Silenus, and Plutarch are what we could consider the classical accounts of the secret name. They mention the execution of Valerius Seranus, the secret name, and the fact that it is not publicly known. John of Leitus' account contains the first two of these elements, but he says openly what the secret name is. Macrobius only speculates on the secret name, not mentioning Seranus' death. St. Augustine and Ovid's accounts are only related to the secret name by implication, although St. Augustine quotes Seranus directly. Ovid's relation to the secret name is part of a hypothesis around why he was exiled by Augustus. Of the classical accounts, it would seem that the story of Seranus gets more explicit and also more violent as the centuries go on. Pliny in the 1st century AD simply writes that he suffered a penalty. Plutarch wrote in the late 1st to early 2nd century AD of his execution by Pompey, and Servius in the late 4th century to early 5th century writes of Seranus' crucifixion. The crucifixion of Seranus seems like an odd detail, as Seranus was a Roman citizen and the punishment of crucifixion was reserved for foreigners. There may be some type of precedent for this, however, in the early 5th century. In the early 5th century, Stilicho, the half-barbarian regent of the Western Empire, ordered the destruction of the Sibylline books. These were, of course, the books which Rome went to for divine help when faced with existential threats, such as Hannibal. This action sparked outrage from Rutilius Nematianus. Rutilius refers to Stilicho as a traitor to the empire's secrets, deserving of a worse punishment than Nero. For Stilicho had killed Rome, which was the mother of us all and center of universal order. Perhaps it was this spirit, that attacks on Rome from a mystical position are the worst of all crimes, is what led to Servius writing of Seranus' crucifixion. This would lead nicely into a discussion about how true the story is. As mentioned earlier, Varro is considered to be the first writer to have written about the story of Seranus and the secret name. Varro lived in the 1st century BC, which makes me inclined to believe in the reality of the story based on proximity, even if some of the details such as the connection between the inventor of the table of contents and Cicero's friend are a bit shaky. As suggested in some of the sources I read on the topic, the secret name of Rome may have been invented sometime prior to or in the 1st century BC, a speculation based on the clauses of various Roman prayers. Some Roman prayers had a catch-all nature to them, so the Romans may cover their bases with gods they did not even know about. Whatever the true nature of these tales are, we will still go into the possible candidates for the secret name, assuming there really was a secret name to reveal. There are 10 candidates to be Rome's secret name/protector deity. These 10 are Jupiter, Saturn, Angorana, Flora, Palles, Maia, Tutalina, Luna, Amor, and Ops Cassavia. Let us start with the king of the gods. Jupiter is the first deity listed by Macrobius. The tutelar deity must obviously be an old deity, not a Greek or Oriental import. Jupiter is one of the oldest gods worshipped in Rome, being the center of both the Old Archaic Triad and Capitoline Triad. Jupiter is the first of the gods in terms of dignity. Called Rex, he is the god of sovereignty and royalty, something which of course would be very important to a new city, like Rome would be when it acquired its secret name. Jupiter's role as sovereign extends to the whole cosmos, similar to Rome's role as a guarantor of universal order. Jupiter is also associated with Rome's destiny to conquer the whole world. It was during the digging of the foundation of his Capitoline temple that a human head was discovered, seen as a sign that Rome was destined for world domination. Part of Jupiter's role as sovereign is his role as the god of oaths, something which would be important to maintaining a secret like the tutelar deity. St. Augustine even cites Uranus referring to Jupiter as the mother of the gods. Almighty Jove, progenitor of kings and things and gods, and Eke, the mother of the gods. St. Augustine explains this reference to the mother of the gods as being about Jupiter's ownership of the world. Some modern scholars do believe that Jupiter was the secret name, but this opinion is not popular with Roman writers. The only writer that explicitly says there are writers who claim Jupiter is a tutelar deity is Macrobius, but he lists this as one of the unlikely possibilities. Jupiter and the name of Rome are also not connected enough in Roman poetry when compared to other deities on this list. Jupiter would also be the odd man, or in this case hermaphrodite out, as he is the only one of the candidates who is not a god of agriculture. But to add a bit of my own commentary, I find Jupiter to be a very attractive option for what the secret name might be. The next candidate is Saturn, father of Jupiter and patron of the Saturnalia festival. Much like most of the other gods in this list, Saturn is an agricultural deity, having introduced agriculture into Latium during the reign of the god Janus over that country, which is what Saturn's site is for. Saturn is seen as the eponymous founder of Latium, as Latium is named after the fact he was hiding from Jupiter there. The fact that Saturn's hiding was said by many ancient antiquarians to be the reason for the name of Latium may indicate some connection to a hidden name for Rome. Saturn ruled Latium jointly with Janus on the Capitoline Hill, one of the 7 hills of Rome, where a lot of important temples are, such as the temple to Jupiter Optimus Maximus and Saturn himself. This was long before Romulus was born or the Trojans arrived in Italy, which would certainly give Saturn the ancientness and indigenousness required for the tutelar deity. In fact, the landmass of Italy itself was once known as Saturnia, because under Saturn's rule it experienced a golden age. Saturn was also the husband of one of the other and more prominent candidates, Ops. However, Saturn does run into the issue of not being mentioned as a candidate by any of the ancient writers, although he has a long list of qualifications and is inextricably tied to Latium. Macrobius in his work titled The Saturnalia does not even mention him as a potential candidate. Even the modern sources I read on this subject do not list him as a candidate. I included Saturn as a candidate, largely due to his connections to Latium and the other candidates who will be mentioned. The next candidate is Luna, who as the name would suggest was the divine personification of the moon. She was a consort of Saturn. Luna is listed second after Jupiter in Macrobius' list of candidates. Worship of Luna was introduced to the city of Rome by the Sabine Titus Tatius. This gives her the antiquity necessary to be the secret name and also a connection to agriculture, which is a common theme among candidates, since the gods introduced by the Sabine king were agricultural in nature. The name Luna is also associated with Lupus, which is a city totem. The root of the word Luna is also connected to other deities on this list, like Flora. But there are not many connections drawn between Luna and Rome in Latin poetry, which is a point against the theory. Macrobius also sees it as less likely. Moving on, let us discuss the deity Tutelina. Quite obviously, Tutelina's name is connected with the term tutelar, as in tutelar deity. Tutelina is an obscure deity. In Pliny's Natural History, when Pliny mentions Numa's establishing of the Fornicalia, the festival for parching corn, it is often thought by early modern scholars such as Vossius and Trinibus that he is making a reference to Tutelina. The lines read as follows. A third divinity it is forbidden by the rules of our religion to name even beneath the roof. In former days, too, they would not so much as taste the corn when newly cut, nor yet wine when just made, before the priest has made a libation of the first fruits. It should be noted that not all early modern scholars think this is a reference to Tutelina. Jean Hardouin, as an example, believes this is a reference to Segesta, who was mentioned previously in the passage. But if we assume this passage is about Tutelina, her obscurity combined with the outright prohibition against mentioning her name in a ritual context would make her a prime candidate for Rome's secret name. The Christian writer Tertullian, when speaking of Tutelina, combines her name with the name of Tatanus, pouring Tutilinus. Combine this knowledge with a quote from Varro. At night, when I expelled Hannibal's army, I, Tatanus, and called Rome. For this reason, all those who strive invoke me. Here we have an example of a deity who has been identified with Tutelina, being called Roma, said to be invoked, and protects the Romans from foreign enemies. This makes quite a strong case for Tutelina to be the secret name of Rome. Moving on, let us discuss Amor. Amor is the Roman god of love, as well as being used as the word for love. Amor spelled backwards is Roma, something which would indicate a connection to the name of Rome. John Litus says that Rome has 3 names, with Amor being the initiatory name of Rome. The reason for this is that all are held fast around the city by divine love. According to Litus, this is why poets refer to Rome as Amaryllis. The poem Versus Rome says this of Rome in love. The flourishing Constantinople is called New Rome. Old Rome, your traditions and walls are falling. A poet predicted it by singing this old poem. Rome, love will suddenly leave you amidst disturbances. Both of these are Byzantine-era examples, but there are examples of a connection between Rome and Amor in earlier periods. The earliest reference is from the city of Pompeii. It reads, Roma, oiem, meio, Amor. There is also the connection between Venus, the goddess of love, and Rome's founding. Venus was the mother of Aeneas, whose lineage would eventually beget Romulus, the founder of Rome. Rome was translated into Greek by the Greek John Litus as the word for strength. Both the Hellenistic East and Latin West think this was the origin of the name Rome. Strength would obviously connect to Romulus's father, the god Mars. If Mars is to influence the public name of Rome, why could not the more esoteric name be influenced by the more ancient divine parentage? These connections have prompted some scholars to accept the Amor hypothesis of Litus. But there is one problem with this idea that may make one want to hold off. If the connections between Amor and Rome are so public and known, it's hardly a secret name, is it? One could argue that this is because Serranus revealed it, but no one explicitly says that Amor was the name of Rome before Litus. It's rather unlikely all Roman society was playing bizarre implication games with no one coming out and saying the secret meaning, especially with the debate around the secret name. Even if Amor was the secret name, this would mean the secret name did not go back to the 8th century BC. Prior to the 4th century BC, Amor would have been spelled as Amos. One would assume that the secret name, given its religious importance, would have been preserved in its original form. An example of the S remaining in a sacred word would be the Carmen Aurulale, preserving the Old Latin laze as opposed to lares. Flora was the goddess of blooming plants, such as trees and flowers. Flora is a native Italian deity. She has an Oscan counterpart in the form of Feluce. Flora's cult in Rome is quite old, with her own priesthood. Flora is a similar candidate to Amor. The third of the three names of Rome listed by John Litus is the sacred name, which is Flora. Flora may have been viewed as a protector of Rome, being connected with the fortune of Rome. During the pagan restoration of Eugenius, her temple was restored. An issue for Flora would be the change from S to R seen in Amor. Flora started as Flos. Again, why would this not be preserved if other older versions of sacred words were preserved? Litus also mentions that the sacred name was known to all, something the secret name most certainly was not. It is also interesting that Florence is used to refer to the city of Constantinople at the time of John Litus' writing. Litus is trying to make a connection between the Old Rome and the New Rome, Constantinople. Such connections to Old Rome were typical of Constantinople at the time, as Justinian II introduced Darics that are similar to Venus plus Aphrodite. Although Flora's cult is old, her importance as an icon of Rome only began in the 4th century AD. Unlike Amor, there is no connection between Flora and Rome in poetry in the early imperial and late republican era. Angerana is the next deity. As Pliny and Silenus say, she was the goddess of silence. She had a statue with her mouth bound and sealed. She was considered the consort of Janus and was later associated with Ops. She was sacrificed to on the 12th day before the calends of January. Georges de Mazille thought that Angerana was sacrificed to on this date because of anguish about the loss of the sun, with the name Angerana being connected to the Latin word for anguish. Silenus mentions her cult being quite old, predating Rome itself. Silenus and Pliny both mention her right after talking about Serranus and the secret name. Macrobius mentions how Angerana is a candidate to be the tutelar deity, but again, Macrobius mentions her as one of the lesser candidates. There is also the fact that neither Pliny nor Silenus mean to imply that Angerana was the tutelar deity. They mention her to emphasize the Roman custom of religious secrecy. Pales is a god or goddess of agriculture, being the deity of flocks and shepherds. Like Jupiter, Pales' sex is ambiguous. Inside Rome, Pales is feminine, but outside the city, Pales is masculine. Pales, as the name would suggest, was associated with the Palatine Hill, the hill which Rome was founded on. Rome was founded by Romulus on Pales' feast day, Perilia. Hadrian and Antoninus Pius constructed a temple which was associated with Perilia. The iconography of the temple was associated with Janus, one of the oldest and indigenous gods of Rome. It was dedicated to Roma Eterna, the divine version of the city of Rome. Bassanov believed that the secret name was Palatium. Palatium was considered the name of a settlement founded on the Palatine Hill prior to Romulus. In the 60th year prior to the Trojan War, an expedition of a defeated faction of the Greek Arcadians was sent to Italy. The leader of the expedition was Evander, who was the son of the Roman nymph Carmenta. He was invited in by the king of the Aborigines, Faunus. They were allowed by Faunus to settle on the Palatine Hill. Both Carmenta and Evander were worshipped with yearly sacrifices in Rome. So this story of an ancient pre-Romulus past had some sway on Roman religious practices. But again, much like Saturn, no ancient source says that Pales was even a candidate, let alone the secret name itself. The penultimate candidate for Rome's secret name is Ops Causavia. Ops was originally the wife of Consus, but became the wife of Saturn. She was a goddess introduced by the Sabine king, Titus Tatius. Consus protected the stored grain while also guaranteeing an abundant harvest. Ops' festival days were on the 25th of August and the 19th of December. Ops had connections to royalty, like Jupiter. Her August festival was celebrated by the Vestal Virgins in the Forum Regia. Macrobius thought that Ops was the most likely candidate for the secret name of Rome. Macrobius did not mention any reason why he favors Ops. He immediately follows up his statement about Ops being the most likely candidate with a statement about how not even the most learned know the city's secret name. There are a few reasons why Macrobius might favor Ops. Opes and opus are terms which occur quite frequently in Latin poetry. Catullus mentions the sospite ope gentem for the race of Romulus. In this poem, Catullus mentions Diana, perhaps conflating the two. In this same poem, Diana is said to be the liege of pure boys and girls, as well as the protector of the Roman race. There is no reason to outright reject Ops, but at the same time, there is still no evidence that completely confirms Ops as a tutelar deity. The final deity we will look at today is Maya. Maya was originally conceived of as an aspect of Tellus/Terra, the goddess of the earth. Like many of the other candidates, Maya has an agricultural dimension. But theology is not the primary reason to consider Maya. For that, we need to look at history. This is where we begin a discussion of the famous poet Ovid. Rather famously, in the year 8 AD, the poet was exiled to the town of Tomis on the Black Sea. Prior to his exile, Ovid was working on a poem on the Roman calendar called the Fasti. The poem would have explained the origin of various Roman customs and celebrations throughout the year, with the poem being divided into 12 books, one for each month. At the time of his exile, Ovid finished about half of the books. It could be assumed that what Ovid was exiled for had something to do with what was written in the Fasti. Ovid in his letters from exile mentions that he feared for his life, and it was only the mercy of Augustus that spared his life. As we know from the various accounts we have covered, the punishment for revealing the secret name was death. In Book 5 of the Fasti, the book for May, Ovid attributes this speech to Calliope, Tethys, the Titaness, who wedded of old by ocean, who encompasses the earth, far as it reaches, with his flowering waters. Their daughter, Pleione, as report has it, was united to Atlas, who upholds the sky, and she gave birth to the Pleiades. Of them, Maia is said to have surpassed her sisters in beauty and to have lain with sovereign Jove. She, on the ridge of Mount Cyllene, wooded with cypresses, gave birth to him who speeds through the air on winged foot. Him the Arcadians, in hurrying laid on huge Menelaus, that land accounted older than the moon, worship what honors due. In exile from Arcadia, Evander came to the Latin field and brought his gods on shipboard. On the spot where now Rome stands, the capital of the world, there were trees and grass and a few sheep, and here and there a cottage. When they had come hither, halt ye, said his prophetic mother, for that rural scene will be the place of empire. The Nonacrian hero obeyed the prophetess, his mother, and halted as a stranger in a foreign land. He taught the natives many sacred rites, but first of all, the rites of two-horned Faunus and of the winged-footed god. Faunus, thou hast a goat god, thou art worshipped by the Luperci in their loincloths. What time the severed hides purify the crowded streets. But thou didst bestow thy mother's name upon the month, O thou, inventor of the curved lyre, patron of thieves. Nor was this the first proof thou didst give of thine affection. Thou art supposed to have given to the lyre 7 strings, the number of the Pleiades. Ovid attaches the story of Maya to the origins of the settlement of Rome, revisiting the story of Evander mentioned previously. Ovid singles out Maya out of all the Pleiades as the most beautiful. This type of emphasis on Maya is not seen anywhere else in Latin or Greek poetry. In regards to the Pleiades, in Greco-Roman mythology there were 7 Pleiades. This is reminiscent of the 7 hills of Rome. According to Varro, the name of settlement on the land of Rome was Septimontium, 7 hills. When the Pleiades and the hills of Rome are laid out, Maya corresponds to the Palatine Hill. According to Macrobius, Maya was given the title of Bona Dea, good goddess. Bona Dea was treated as a protector of the Roman people. The Pleiades also rises around the time of April or May. April is the month of Rome's founding. One critique I could think of for this theory is the fact that if Ovid was exiled for this sly reference to the secret name, why did none of the Roman writers who mention the secret name pick up on this? So what can we gather from all this? Well, the secret name of Rome will more than likely remain a mystery. Every candidate has issues, or at the very least does not have something conclusive to conclude they are the tutelar deity. While it is unlikely that the secret name of Rome, if it even existed, will ever be definitively discovered, the discussions around Rome's secret name shows a Roman interest in an ancient past. Many of the candidates bring to mind stories about what was happening on the hills of Rome prior to Romulus. Perhaps there is something to these stories of an ancient past. Perhaps urban settlements on the 7 hills are older than is thought. Perhaps one of these settlements survives as a half-remembered mystical name to serve in Roman rituals. Rome's pre-Romulus past may be a video in the future, but for now I will end it here. Thank you for watching.